Daydreamaholic by C. Don McCallum. It's him. Marcie Taylor thought, scrambling to get her stuff. When she heard the knock on the door, she still couldn't believe that Brandon James, the star quarterback of the 7th grade football team, had asked to walk her to school today, especially after that touchdown he scored in last night's game. Marcie put on her Henderson Eagles middle school band jacket, grabbed her backpack, and walked to the door. She would have run, but she didn't want him to think she was overanxious or something. That was the surefire way to scare a guy off. Besides, the fall fling was coming up this Friday night, and she didn't even have a date yet. Marcie wanted him to ask her more than anything in the world, but if there was one thing she knew, it's that she would have to play it cool. And if things keep going the way they've been going lately, it was just a matter of time. She took one last look in the mirror by the door, tried out a couple of smiles she'd want Brandon to see first thing in the morning, and smoothed down her dark brown hair. She still wished she could get colored contacts, though. Brown eyes are just so boring, she thought as she turned to open the door. She turned the doorknob and sunshine spilled in the foyer. Brandon James was ready and waiting. "Hey, Marcie," Brandon said, blushing as he ran his fingers through his light brown hair. Maybe it was just the early morning sun, but he seemed to have a golden glow around him. Just like that Greek guy they learned about in English class. Adonis, was it? "Hey, Brandon." That was all she said. On the outside, she gave him a little smile, but on the inside, she did 2 back flips, a pirouette, and to finish it all off, she blew kisses to the sky. "So how's your arm?" she asked, heading to the sidewalk that led to the school. "It's all right," he said and smiled. "A little sore, but not bad." He looped his throwing arm around her left arm. They both acted like it was no big deal, but it was. "I still can't believe that touchdown you made yesterday. That was so cool." "Yeah, me neither," he said, blushing. "The team really stepped it up to get me there." For a second, Marcie thought she would tell him they couldn't have done it without him, no matter what he said, but she thought better of it because one of the 1,500 and some things she loved about him was that he didn't go around patting himself on the back all the time. He was modest. She looked at him and could see that he was glad that she didn't go piling on the compliments. There was a kindness there that she always remembered him having, but was it possible his green eyes were even more beautiful than the day before? For a minute or two they walked silently arm in arm. Then Brandon stopped. He looked her right in the eyes. "Marcie?" he asked. He looked around to see if anybody was around, kind of like he was nervous about something. "Yeah." "Do you mind if I give you a kiss?" This time it was Marcie's turn to blush. She just knew he was going to ask her out now. "I don't mind, Brandon," she said. Brandon leaned in and, "Marcie." No longer on the sidewalk and Brandon nowhere in sight, Marcie was standing back in the kitchen of her house, trying to look busy by pretending to go through her backpack. The all too familiar screech of her 5-year-old brother's voice had taken her away from her daydream of a perfect morning. Why does he have to be so loud all the time, she thought, especially shouting out my stupid name. "Marcie," Jonathan squealed again. "Ugh." There it was again. Marcie thought her name couldn't be more boring. Plain vanilla would have been more exciting. "What?" she yelled to the front of the house. "I see your boyfriend." "Would you be quiet?" She hissed at her little brother, having traveled the full length of the house in the shortest number of steps possible. "And he's not my boyfriend." "You better hurry before he gets away," he teased. The little boy wiggled his hips. Marcie imagined her brother with donkey ears and threw her backpack over her band jacket and walked out the door. Out on the sidewalk, she heard a knock on the window behind her. When she looked around, Jonathan was squirming around and making kissy faces at her. She gave him a look that burned right through the glass. He just held his belly and giggled so loudly that she could hear him all the way outside. Rolling her eyes, she adjusted her backpack on her shoulders. For some reason, it was really uncomfortable today. "It's probably the way my flute's crammed in there," she thought. But she couldn't worry about that now. Brandon James was walking down the sidewalk that ran in front of her house. His pearly whites blinded every passerby in sight. At least that's what Marcie saw. As she trailed behind him, a game plan started forming in her mind. She could see herself standing in a sweaty locker room. Behind her was a big chalkboard with a bunch of X's and O's were drawn all over it. Okay, team, listen up, she said to a room full of Marcies, dressed up in their most fashionable outfits, getting ready for the big game. The fall fling dance is this Friday night, and we're running out of time. Last we heard, Brandon hasn't asked anyone yet, so we still have a chance at this thing. All right, coach, one of the Marcies in the back yelled. One of the other Marcies high-fived her. Now, with the touchdown that Brandon scored last night, there are going to be a lot of other girls out there who have the same idea as we do, so we've got to be ready to act. Understand? Coach Marcie asked. Yes, ma'am, the Marcies chorused in unison. You can't just expect that he's going to ask us to the social, Coach Marcie paused. No, ma'am, the team shifted where they sat. The coach's speech was really working them up. If we're going to get asked to the fall fling, we are going to actually have to talk to the guy. Am I right? Coach Marcie asked. Right, she shouted out loud. Brandon turned around and looked at her. Okay, she thought. The coach's words still rang in her ears. This is it. This is my chance. She smiled her prettiest smile, but not too big. Oh, hey, Brandon, she said. Hey. He flicked his head in what kind of looked like a nod. That was a really cool touchdown you made, she said, catching up to him. Thanks, he said, but he blushed and half smiled. Marcie's heart melted when she saw his movie star perfect smile. He looked better than some of the guys in her teen magazines, with the way his hair fell around his face and those amazing eyes. And he had smiled at her. This is going to be a good day, Marcie thought. Just as Marcie was basking in the sunshine of Brandon's smile, she looked around and saw Chad and Sly and Tyrone Davis crossing the street. They were walking toward Brandon. Oh no, Marcie sighed, seeing her big chance slipping away in an instant. Why do they think he needs a whole entourage just because he's the best player on the team, she thought. They probably just hang out with him because he's so smart and they want to copy his homework. She was so annoyed that she didn't even hear what they said. It was probably something stupid. She fell a little way behind them and watched the three boys kicking at each other, laughing as they walked. Her backpack suddenly felt very cumbersome. Her flute jammed into her ribs. She wanted to fix it, like she should have done before she even set off for school, but she didn't want to miss anything. Things might work out the way she imagined. You never know. But she wasn't so sure about that now. She looked at the boys. Her thoughts churned faster than Brandon could run. Why can't he see they're just using him? That's when it happened. She didn't hear what they said. She didn't know what they were talking about. She just knew that all three boys had turned around and looked at her, and they laughed. She didn't know what it was, but there was something about the way they laughed that she did not like. There was something in their eyes. She wasn't sure why. She just knew that she didn't like the way it made her feel. Her heart shriveled up in her chest. During the rest of the walk to school, she tried to focus on the warm sun beaming through her band jacket and not the group of boys joking around and kicking stuff in front of her. The way they had laughed was going to haunt her all day. It would overshadow the happiness that Brandon's smile and gentle thanks had made her feel. But maybe it wasn't a gentle thanks like she had thought. Maybe she had just imagined he was being nice. Maybe he didn't care at all. Marcie tried to listen to the birds chirping around her to get her mind off of the boys' cruel laughter. She tried to look in the cars that rushed past her on the street, but there was nothing she could do but try to focus on something else and let the bad things slip away from her thoughts. She was so bummed she couldn't even find a little comfort in a daydream. The way they laughed had sent her a message that she just didn't like, a message of teasing and mockery. Frustrated and confused, Marcie couldn't concentrate on anything else. She felt stuck in that one moment in time. In her mind, the boys circled around her on the sidewalk outside the school. "You must be crazy," Chad and Sly said, pointing his finger at her. "Didn't you see that touchdown he scored yesterday?" Tyrone Davis asked with a laugh. Then Brandon said in a voice loud enough for the kids waiting outside of the school to hear, "There is no way I would ever ask you to the social." The boys laughed again, and Marcie felt herself getting smaller and smaller until she was ant-sized and hiding in the giant band jacket that covered her in a mound on the sidewalk. 7th grade was the biggest nightmare of her life, and the school year was barely underway. Somehow Marcie managed to make her way to the entrance of the school where she knew her best friend would be waiting. Seeing Sammy Templeton waiting for her in front of the middle school sign was a comforting sight. Sammy was her usual cute self in her overalls, t-shirt, and sandals. Only she could get away with wearing those pink bows tied at the end of each black French braid. "Hi, Sammy." Marcie tried to smile, but the muscles in her face were frozen in a frown. "Hi, Marcie." Sammy smiled and snuck a look at Brandon passing by them into the building. Without any need for discussion, the two girls fell in behind the boys to file into the building with the rest of the mumbling horde of students. In a haze, Marcie tried to let Brandon drift from her sight, from her thoughts, and get down to the business of school. But her feet fell into their normal routine. She matched his pace and walked toward the stairs, but only because he was walking toward the stairs. Then Sammy looked at her friend with a sideways glance. "What's up, Marcie? Don't you need to put up your flute? You know, band hall?" Sammy asked. Watching Marcie return to earth, Sammy smiled. "Oh, yeah, I forgot," Marcie smiled for the first time that morning. Having her friend there made it easier to laugh at herself, to let her see what a spaced-out dork she was being. "You don't have to go if you don't want to," Marcie said. "Come on, let's go," Sammy said, grabbing her friend and pulling her toward the band hall. Students fought their way to the instrument shelves in a boisterous symphony of laughter and chattering. Sammy stood in the doorway and took the flute out of her friend's backpack while Marcie scanned for a way through to the shelves of the busiest section of all the flute section. "Why does everyone in the world have to play the flute?" one girl said, looking for a place to squeeze in. A couple of the other girls guffawed. "Hey, wait your turn," someone else said. "Oh," a girl whined and grabbed her foot. "Watch where you're going." But Marcie only heard them as faraway voices, as if in a dream. The nightmare of this morning was back. The boys' laughter from the walk to school played again and again in her mind. Her footsteps had carried her away from the scene of the crime, but they couldn't stop the never-ending instant replay running through her head. Brandon smiling, her heart melting, the boys looking at her. They laughed, the boys laughed. And now this terrible trapped feeling. The boys had laughed, but why? Sure, she wanted Brandon to notice her, but this was not what she had in mind. Thank you for listening to Daydreamaholic by C. Dawn McCallum. If you're enjoying this story, please consider sharing it with someone you know, and please like the video and subscribe to this channel to help others discover these stories.